Hi everybody, Isuru here. So I grew up in Sri Lanka, so I kind of obviously I was not in abject poverty, but I do recognize how easy it is to, when you have an elevator, when you have air conditioning, when you have hot water, it just, the quality of life is something that I came to the US for. So I've been an energy investor for the last 15 years. Originally, when I was working for somebody else, looking at fossil fuels, and then I set up my own investment firm in 2015, coinciding with the Paris Climate Accord signing. Started looking really into clean tech and low carbon solutions. So I studied from wind turbine manufacturing to hydrogen fuel cells to uranium, and then that got me to nuclear. And I've been a climate activist for the last policy advocate, and more outspoken activist for nuclear over the last, becoming more and more over the last 5 years or so. So I've been, so along with a few of my colleagues in New York and other groups, we have done an extensive amount of research on the electricity sector of New York State, the changes thereof. And as a student of Howard University Extension School, I have used all of the coursework, all the assignments to research climate solutions and electricity shift impacts on human life and climate and the environment. But before I go into my piece, I wanted to share with you somebody who maybe is a better spokesman for biological impacts of energy and the challenges of human perception of risk. Ida Irushalme, she's a cell biologist and science communicator, and she has been she's part of this group called Mothers for Nuclear, and they are advocates for nuclear on behalf of the children. So I would like to share this clip.
After you start reading a little about risk and research into risk, that we make hasty assumptions about these things, because it turns out that we are actually really poor at assessing risks. I used to think that nuclear power had risks that were just way beyond anything of the other energy sources. That sure, you can produce a lot of energy, but how can it be worth it when there are such extraordinary risks connected to the nuclear? And I just knew this. Everybody just knew this. It wasn't that I had to go and check, is it really like this? I had already made it was a very empathic, very deep kind of truth that I felt, because this is what I've learned. But coming and growing as a scientist, I realized that, wow, okay, I just know this is a really risky position to take. And why is it that we make such easy false assumptions, actually? Nature is something that we all often directly view as something good and wonderful. Me included. I want to protect nature. That was one of my starting statements. But actually, nature is such a dangerous place that while we have evolved in nature, we have developed these kind of really quick ways of assessing risks, because that's the only way to survive. So basically, we've learned to look at any threat and make a flash judgment. Is that dangerous or is it not? We don't have any time there for reflection. We simply have some shortcuts that more often than not give us the right direction, and we survive to see another day. And this is a instinctual, almost an emotional reaction. But nowadays we live in a world of abstract information, not just little sounds in the bush or strange looking objects on the ground. So we have these same shortcuts still, and we have to try to make sense of this abstract information. And this leads to a lot of errors with these heuristics, with these biases, shortcuts. And I know this as a mother. As soon as I hear about anything that could be a potential threat to my child, I will have a jolt of worry before anything else kicks in. Even though I am a scientist, it doesn't help. Even if you're a policymaker or an environmentalist or any kinds of, we all have this. Nobody is immune. And on the other hand, it's very important to realize that while we have these reactions, I, as a mother, for instance, know that if I fail continually to let these slower reflective processes of checking the evidence and seeing if this really was the best way and the safest way to go, then if I don't let that process a chance to take place, I might actually unintentionally end up causing more harm. So this is why thinking about risk really matters. And we tend to always jump into the conclusion that anything that is really unfamiliar, anything that's imposed upon us that's not in our own control, and anything that's artificial or man-made gets this it's flagged. It's directly, it must be a threat, and we actually have to process it some time to figure out if it's actually not a threat. This is a slow, more gradual process that takes some work. And nuclear power fits here on this, it ticks all these boxes because it's our newest source of energy. When you look at all the other sources of energy, we actually have a sense of how to tend to a fire, how to dam a little brook, what kind of powers we have if we put up a sail and we have wind blowing on it, or if we just sit on the sunlight and we feel the heat and we know what's coming. We know these kind of forces. We can touch them, we can manipulate them. And even the drawbacks of those, say we know how to deal with smoke. We know in what proportion is harmful. We know how to deal with floods. We know what's too much heat and what's too little and what to do to manage that. We know how to prepare for storms. These kind of forces we have a sense for, quite literally a sense for. But nuclear, we have no idea how to control a fission reaction, for instance. Obviously, that's just way too far from any everyday perspective. And we don't even have a sense for ionizing radiation. We can't sense it. So it's basically, it's really strange and unfamiliar thing that we can't touch. And now with our curiosity and our intellect, we have made forays into understanding the world, and we have this knowledge about it. So the knowledge of radiation is completely new to us. And this is funny because radiation is not new at all, because radiation is everywhere around us. It's a natural thing. If you, I don't know if you got my slides, I had one where I compared the sources of radiation. We can take a look at that. Because it's most of the radiation that we get is overwhelmingly from natural sources. And even though now we know about the radiation, that now we have the knowledge that okay, this place is particularly has a lot of radiation, we don't, somehow it doesn't creep into the same, it's not flagged as dangerous. And then we have, in comparison, we have this vanishingly small proportion of radiation that comes from, well, it's a small proportion that comes from man-made sources. Most of it is medical imaging. And what comes from nuclear power is such a small part, it's basically negligible.
Well, leave it at that. Hope you can hear me. And jump into what's happening on the ground in New York, specifically Indian Point nuclear power plant, which is the sorry, maybe I didn't get that right. Let me see here. Can you see me now? I think you can. Yeah, so this is Indian Point, which is the sole nuclear reactor in downstate New York. It's a 2 gigawatt nuclear plant, runs 24/7, 91% uptime, and it is being shut down. So New York State is curious because it's a tale of two grids. We have a largely carbon-free upstate grid, which is mostly powered by hydro and nuclear, and then a largely fossil-fired downstate grid. And transmission bottlenecks prevent there's wind growing in upstate regions, but you can't bring them down here because we don't have enough transmission capacity to get it into downstate. Of that downstate portion, 81%, so most of it is fossil, as mentioned. This includes behind the meter solar, so that includes all the rooftop solar that we have. Most of the downstate carbon-free electricity is coming from nuclear. So it's been shut down. So what does that mean? How big of an impact is it? So Indian Point 2, the reactor was shut down in April 30th, 2020. And the carbon-free electricity that we lost from this one reactor closure was bigger than all of the generation from solar and wind on an annual basis from all the solar and wind plants deployed statewide over the last 20 years. So it is, we are basically erasing 2 decades of climate progress in one fell swoop. And in April 2021, the plan is to close the remaining nuclear power plants. And that then means that we have to get back up to Indian Point 2's generation and then 3's generation to get to where we were in terms of carbon-free generation. So that likely takes decades. So we don't have to postulate on how this plays out because we New York ISO has a real-time dashboard, and members of this group have done this analysis to show that it's pretty much a kilowatt or kilowatt replacement by fossil. So the pre-Indian Point closer to post, you just have a massive increase in fossil generation. Wind and solar are not waiting in the line for us to close our nuclear plants, and so they run on. Just because you close the nuclear plant doesn't mean that the wind blows more or the sun shines more. So the big claim that those who promote this closure is that, yeah, of course, renewables and energy efficiency will take care of it. We don't need nuclear anymore because we are going renewables. And I thought that, you know, a year ago when I saw the grid difference, I also thought, I hoped and I prayed that, yeah, nuclear plant closure is not that bad because it's got to be renewables that are replacing it. Unfortunately, that is far from the truth. The fossil portion is this gray bar down here, and when Indian Point closes, pretty much is a fossil creep that's going to take over. Gas generation has grown substantially in the last decade and a half. Gas went from about 30% of the mix to 40% in the same period that solar and wind went from 0.5% to 5%. So this is the fossil share of electricity generation in New York. As Eric mentioned up front, we have gotten rid of most of the coal, and that's mostly because of cheap gas-based electricity. But by closing Indian Point 2, we are erasing effectively 2 decades. The grid will be more fossil-fired than it has ever been since 2002. So all the hard work that everybody did in installing the solar panels, windmills, etc., are erased in overnight, effectively. So why is it that, you know, we hear this claim that solar is now cheaper and wind is now cheaper? If that's the case, why is it that there's a fossil takeover rather than a renewable takeover when you get rid of nuclear? And you know, when I put this chart together, it was abundant. It was clear that fossil is the marginal electron generation. So the orange line is the electricity price, and then the black line is the methane gas price sold to electricity generators. So you can see this is a one-to-one correlation here. Gas sets the price of electricity in New York. With the shale revolution that's happening all across the United States, we have electricity prices in New York have come down by cut in half from the 2014 to 2008 to 2014 levels to 2019. What that means is that every other source of electricity is uneconomic. Only thing that's economic is gas-based generation. That's why you need to subsidize solar and wind to allow them to compete, and we are doing that federally as well as the state. But Indian Point was not given any subsidies, any support for its environmental or ecological or human health characteristics of its generation, let alone the reliability of electricity that generates. But we don't know the exact price that makes Indian Point economic, but all you need is from the whatever $25 megawatt hour price to get to that $40 is just a small margin to make that economic. And we, as a state, have decided that we don't want to do that, but we want to buy offshore wind at $160 a ton, which means if you have the same number of dollars to deploy, you're going to get 1/10 or 1/8 thereof of the output that you could get with the same amount of money. When you look a little closer at New York City, and this is a busy chart, I acknowledge, but it is super important. New York City is a population-dense area. We don't have a lot of land mass to deploy low-density renewables. So New York City consumes a third of New York State's electricity. We consume about 52 terawatt hours per year, of which only 22.5 is generated in New York City or surrounding area. So there are some plants in New Jersey that are dedicated producers for New York City electricity. As you can see, solar is minuscule, and I'm allocating all of hydro generation downstate to New York City for this exercise. And given the grid constraint that we talked about, there's no, the generation has to come from this electric island, so to speak. So what happens is when you get rid of the largest source of carbon-free electricity, fossil plants ramp up. So these massive gas plants have been built in the Hudson Valley that are ramping up, or that are currently mostly ramped up. And that was the first phase for Indian Point 2 replacement. And now when Indian Point 3 closes, you're going to expand the generation from peaker plants and other low utilization plants in already existing old peaker plants in the metro New York City area. We'll have to run about a third higher to make up the electricity difference. And these areas, as it happens, is one of the highest particulate pollution areas in the country, and one of the highest areas with the highest number of COVID deaths, which is a respiratory illness. This is just demonstrates the challenge of growing renewables. The wind facilities required to match Indian Point's output takes about 1.5 times the land mass of entire New York City. And even beyond New York City, in New Jersey or Long Island or Connecticut are highly population dense areas. So we don't have this spare land running, waiting for us to deploy renewables. This slide is also from the Juice movie, which is phenomenal. So what's the impact of this? The emissions increase thereof. So this is a kind of a busy slide, but what this shows is that you could use, that we have been having energy efficiency savings and renewable growth over the last few years. So what we could do is use those renewable resources to displace fossil plants in population dense areas. Not only then, but we are choosing to use that electricity generation to displace another source of carbon-free electricity. But what's even frustrating is that that is not enough. So we need to build or expand fossil plants to make up the difference. So if you say in a scenario where you kept Indian Point running and allowed fossil fuels to be displaced by renewables, you have one profile. versus another profile, the current business as usual trajectory where you increase fossil burning and you look at the difference. It's a 12 to 15 million metric ton emissions increase per annum due to this Indian Point closure decision. The range here is due to the methane leaks, which we can get into the Q&A if there's time. And we are following the same trajectory as Germany. Germany's fossil fired electricity generation is at the same level as it was in 1992. And that's because while their renewables have grown, they have killed their nuclear. So they have negated 3 decades of climate progress due to fear. And also Germany spent billions of dollars to get to this point, and the electricity prices are the highest in all of Europe, I believe, and their grid is like one of the dirtiest in Europe because the fossil consumption is lignite coal, which is the worst form of both for air pollution but also for carbon. So back to New York, particulate pollution. So the 2 massive gas plants that were built in, so this is New York. New York City is somewhere down here. Indian Point is 35 miles up Hudson River. And then these are the 2 massive gas plants. So these gas plants are currently spewing particulate pollution on 550,000 people here, 600,000 people here within a 25-mile radius from these plants. But come Indian Point 3 closure, we are going to increase emissions from these. So this is Manhattan, this is Queens, this is Brooklyn for out-of-towners. And we are going to increase, these plants are expanding. There's plans to build massive gas plants in Astoria, and these plants are increasing because we still need electricity. And the kicker here is that 13 million people live within 25 miles of this, which means that the health impact is ginormous. So back to the why this happened. It's based on myths, as we try to debunk again and again. When Governor Cuomo announced the closure of Indian Point, he repeated this folk myth that 20 people within a 50-mile radius of Indian Point can sleep better now that they can be safe from this nuclear meltdown. Because the idea is that you can't evacuate a city of 8 million people, and therefore they are all going to die when the nuclear plant explodes. So, but there is no rational scientific basis for a 50-mile evacuation zone. Nuclear radiation depletes, there's a half-life to it. And I mean, we know this from a factual basis as well. Japan's panicked evacuation of a 12-mile radius killed 1,000+ people. So what all you need to do, so the evacuation zone is a 5-mile radius plus a 2-mile radius plus a 5 miles downwind. And all you need to do in a 50-mile radius is to test, do periodic food sampling to make sure that you're safe. There's a bunch of other myths. We can get deeper into these in the Q&A, but radioactive waste, Eric did a great job, so I don't want to get in that. This thing that it's an aging plant, it's falling apart, the bolts are coming apart. That this plant operated at 91% capacity factor in 2019. That if you think about any industrial facility, any clock, any car, any train, there's very little, if any, other facilities in the world that actually operate 91% of the time 24/7. And the ability to do that is because you are proactively maintaining it, you are keeping it safe. Any plant, any piece that's old or is wearing out can be replaced, and it is being replaced. And this plant can last another 40 years in nuclear plants in New York, some have been in US have been extended to an 8-year life. So this plant is in its prime of its youth, not aging and dying. The other concern is that thermal pollution kills fish. The plant does use water from the Hudson River to cool excess heat, and that goes back to against what? So yes, it does kill some fish embryos, but there's people downriver from it. They fish, they swim, they eat. They're not glowing green. And what's the alternative? If we keep on using carbon pollution, all the fish and all the humans are in trouble, to say the least. So it's that's short-termism, and it's and these claims are common to many nuclear plants. And the other concern is seismic fault. But this plant is likely one of the only buildings that can actually withstand the 7 Richter scale quake, when most buildings in New York are not built to survive that. For instance, in Japan, when tsunamis or earthquakes happen, people actually run to nuclear plants because they know that's the safest place to be. So what can we do? We can stand up for science. We can stand up for climate. We can help people unlearn a lot of the things that they think that they know, and it's a profit. So there's, if you can help us with saving Indian Point, we'd love it. But it's not just that. We need to speak up for science and evidence and go with that rather than pursue feel-good measures that are likely to fail. With that, let me switch to a more entertaining piece of this presentation. That our colleagues at Generation Atomic just put together this amazing video that I think you'll all enjoy.
Blackout, too late to back out. From New York City to Krakow, no turning back now. We demand infinite power that never taps out, and the shutting of all fossil fuel smoke stacks down. Don't forget to ask how, use every single tool. Got that solar bling on my roof, all of my neighbors are thinking it's cool. Renewables are beautiful, get them connected to every cottage. But the crucible is, can they get a city level wattage? 10%, maybe 25, until the wind power dies. No flow from a hydro reservoir, then a drought is dry. The sun sets under cloudy skies, out of sight, out of mind. Old King Cole comes out at night. Sunrise capacity surges, crashing the circuits. Batteries would be perfect, it's too bad they don't work yet. Plus the cost to purchase, it straight up doubles the pesos. So again with the fossil fuel stepping up to cover the base load.
Commuter, sky polluter, ride my scooter, climate movement. Computer, Wi-Fi booster, fly juicer, hi-fi music. Clean energy means everything, everything. Bright future, clean energy means everything. Bright future.
So here we go, yo, what's a scenario? The carbon footprint is low in France and Ontario. The way they chose to carry the load is scary to folks, but the resulting quality of life there is very dope. Look at what they did in Sweden, low emission Sweden. Took the power grid and cleaned it safely. Ask a physics teacher, 50 years of nuclear waste fits in a single arena. And nature is more radioactive, check a dosimeter reader. Carcinogenic coal ash kills 500,000 people every single year. After leaving them feeling a little wheezy, replace particulate coal with fishing and breathe easy. So people will get a little heated, but I don't give a millisievert. You wanna fight climate change, fight nuclear decommissions. Replace fishing with fossil fuel and you increase emissions. Keep that clean, efficient energy in the system. How is that politically divisive?
sky polluter. Ride my scooter, climate movement. Computer, Wi-Fi booster. Fly juicer, hi-fi music. Clean energy means everything. Everything. Bright future, clean energy means everything. Bright future.
Abundance. That's what happens when everything functions. 1 billion people today still have nothing to plug in. Every third of a second another one comes in. No judgment, just take the power production number today and double it. Now every solar panel plan is just keeping up with new demand. Burn baby burn, another natural gas plant. The air is a trash can for fossil fuel when you're burning it. But frack that, we have a zero carbon alternative that's so radioactive you can't discuss it calmly. A nuclear reaction to a sensible energy policy. I'm afraid of a meltdown, but only psychologically. In response to a technology that produces juice constantly. Is it dangerous? Compared to what? Fairy dust? It's safer than other major energy production areas. Climate change is scary enough, even with various solutions at play. Take one of the biggest away and it's gonna bury us.
Commuter, sky polluter. Ride my scooter, climate movement. Computer, Wi-Fi booster. Fly juicer, hi-fi music. Clean energy means everything. Everything. Bright future, clean energy means everything. Bright future.
There we go. Well, I hope you found that entertaining. I should add